Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into another episode of the Straight Fire Podcast, the first episode of 2025. And I have to start off with an apology. As it was pointed out to me, I uploaded the same file twice for the what was the last podcast that we did?
It was something about predestination. I can't.
No, I
Well, that's the one
uploaded
you
the
uploaded.
predestination one
It was
twice.
the one on like a perfect Christian.
Yes, a perfect Christian day. I uploaded the predestination one twice instead of a perfect Christian day. Was able to
Tech guy.
I was able to change it on all of them, but Apple Podcasts. So if you're listening on that and you weren't able to listen to the Perfect Christian Day, you can go find that on Spotify or YouTube. I don't know why it didn't change, but it wasn't. So this is the tech guy coming at you live. Unsure of why that happened. But hey, 2025, new year, new camera angle. And we're starting off with a, I guess, not a new topic because all of our topics are new, but we're starting off with a really good topic to start this year. And it is excuses. And to start off really quickly, let me move this a little bit, move my microphone. There we go. Start off really quickly. Landon, why does our culture always look to give excuses?
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we don't like to hold ourselves accountable for a lot of things. And, you know, when we say excuses, there's different kinds of excuses. There's excuses for things that I should do, things that I shouldn't do, and I'm giving excuses for those. And so there's two different types, if you will, of excuses. But I think all of that kind of is driven by the fact that I don't like to hold myself accountable for a lot of things. And so when there's something that I want to do that I shouldn't necessarily be doing, then I make an excuse for that because I want to do it. Or maybe it's something that I need to do that I don't want to, and I'm just trying to find ways to get out of whatever it is.
Yeah. No, why are we as a society in, brand new year 2025, why are we looking to cast off responsibility with excuses? Because I believe that, like Landon said, that's their primary method. Like, the way I'm going to get rid of responsibility is through excuses. Well, I couldn't do A, B, and C things because, D happened. Do you get me?
As I was researching for this podcast, I was looking up at this exact thing. Actually, I was looking up why do we make excuses and stuff. And one of the biggest things I saw is, like Landon said, we try to avoid that responsibility of our actions, other people's actions. We try to avoid the responsibility of things we have to do, stuff like that. But it's in human nature to protect ourselves, right? That makes perfect sense. And one of the biggest reasons we make excuses and one of those reasons is, yes, I don't want other people to think I look bad, but one of the biggest things is to protect ourselves. We convince ourselves, hey, I couldn't have done this, so we don't feel like worse people. So we can still feel like, hey, I'm a good person because it's not that I chose not to do it, it's because I couldn't do that. So that natural reaction of protecting ourselves is a very hard one to overcome. And you see our society really just struggles with that ability of taking responsibility.
Yeah, I think as we turn focus to Christians, it's especially easy, or it can be in the church, to be like, well, I was trying to go see this shut-in, but A, B, and C things came up. And especially when going to church, I feel like this is the one I heard the most. Well, really wanted to go to Wednesday night service, but, work got in the way again. And I think as we start this podcast, what you need to be mindful of is putting yourself in.
Sorry.
No, you're good. I really just want to make that as awkward as possible for you. I think as we start the year off, we need to be mindful of putting ourselves in situations where excuses can arise. Like, hey, if I volunteer to do this thing after work, there's definitely a chance where it could go long and I could miss church. Like, you have to be mindful of those situations because it's one thing for it. I mean, I'm sure people do have legitimate excuses, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Are there legitimate excuses? But like, if I'm at work and all of a sudden I look down, it's 7:15, right? And church started at 7, then right, is that a legitimate excuse? I think so, as long as it doesn't become routine, right? I don't know if y'all would disagree with that. Would y'all disagree with that?
I think, and I'm sure Lanny can tackle this too, but I think just really quickly, that word excuse puts the wrong idea in people's head when it's not. Excuse in my opinion, means I could have, but I didn't. That would be more like I can't make it this time. Like I physically cannot. I cannot make it this time. So that word excuse is a little bit different than, hey, I'm just not able to, you know.
Lane, would you add to that?
I mean, I think I wasn't really going there, but I think that's a good place to go with that. Is most excuses is just that I don't want to, and that's an excuse. Some would say that an excuse can be something that you can't do, and so you're excused from that. I think we're gonna kind of talk more about the I don't want to, and I think we need to make sure we keep separating that as we go throughout the podcast. But I think work is one of those things that you can't really help with. I think if you're trying to be a solid Christian and trying to do everything you can, you should be trying to strive to make sure that you're able to go to Bible study on Wednesday and worship on Sunday. But times will come where you can't do that. But I think Noah brought up a good point that there's a difference between what you can't do and what you choose not to do.
Yeah, I mean, Landon has a legitimate point that, like, sometimes there are such thing as real excuses. That's why, that's kind of why we have that word. Hey, you're excused from this because of this and this.
Yeah.
But I think specifically in this context, I was thinking of, hey, it's something, it's what I said earlier. It's something you can't do versus something you won't do for reasons you make up.
I think that's the definition we're going to run with for the podcast. An excuse is something you could have done, but you didn't.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's the definition. We should just to clarify everything and make sure that we're all on the same level. We're not talking about an excuse of like, well, I was like sick in bed, like dying for 3 days and, I couldn't go to church. Obviously you can get a pass.
I had the most highly contagious disease on the planet, and
That's no excuse.
and I still came.
Yes.
And that leads to a lot of interesting talks about COVID, right? Did we as a church, and
that is a big old can of worms.
If I was preaching a sermon, I don't know if I'd bring this up, but since it's a podcast, it just feels, I guess, it doesn't feel like everyone's listening, even though I know they are. But I guess, did we as a church have an excuse to not meet? And I've heard people with several different opinions on the matter. I remember I was at Polishing the Pulpit, a church conference, for those of you who don't know. Is it a church conference? Is that how y'all describe it?
Yeah.
Church conference? Yeah. I was for a church conference, for those of you who might not know what Polishing the Pulpit is. And I heard one guy say, like, this online worship, it was not, he's like, it was not worship. And I was thinking about that, like, and I don't know. I haven't really thought about that. I've just kind of always hoped that we don't have to go back to that again. But yeah, like, do y'all think we had a legitimate excuse? We don't have to spend a lot of time on this. I'm just really wondering y'all's opinion.
I got you.
I was saying, Landon, for all those listening, Landon pointed at me. I was about to point right back at him.
I'll take it. It's fine. No, I think a lot of that, I'm glad I'm not an elder in that situation.
Absolutely.
Because it was in those times that we could just look at our eldership to make that decision. Because, like you said, there are compelling cases for both sides. You want to protect the elderly, the young, by not giving the opportunity to get them sick. Those that can't really attack those diseases well in their body, they can't handle that. And we want to protect them as a church family. We want to protect our brothers and sisters in Christ physically. But then also we can't let our physical life get in the way of our spiritual. And so both sides had compelling arguments. And personally, I'm not going to say one was more right than the other, because that's just going to pick a side that now it doesn't matter. And so I was glad we had elderships that could determine that. They were wise enough to make those decisions. I will say the congregation I was going to quit having service. I went somewhere that did, because I was okay with taking the chance of getting COVID if that meant I was still getting to worship. But I'm not going to say you were wrong for staying home either.
Well, it's different for us three because of like where we are physically, right? COVID, the chance of COVID being serious for us is in the decimals.
Well, I mean, I got COVID like 3 times, and like
okay.
I
got COVID once. I got COVID once. It was pretty bad. Like, it didn't feel good, but like it was just laid in bed for a few days and I recovered. But like, for people who have compromised immune systems, for what Landon said, the elderly and the young, some people, I think the reason I heard was, if the doors are open, people are going to come whether they should or not.
Yeah.
Because you can always, in a perfect world, we'd be like, well, we open the doors. Those of you who can come, why don't y'all go ahead and come? But those of you who have compromised immune systems, those of you who are at risk, y'all don't come. But, people have the right view of when the church doors are open, I need to be there no matter what. And that's, who am I to say that, no, that's the wrong view for you to have? Right. Do you think God would tell a Christian that, no, you shouldn't be coming to church because of this physical condition you have? I mean,
Yeah, and again, this is solely opinion, and I'm with Landon.
Yeah, I'm gonna say a lot of this has been opinion so far.
I think landing on either side of this is probably not a good idea, right? Because
Yeah.
again, it's in the past, and I think when if this situation ever arises again, I think different decisions will be made, and we learn from those.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody was perfect. No system you picked was going to be perfect. No one was going to be happy with everything. But my opinion, and again, this is just my opinion, is the fact that I think we should have left the doors open. If you want to be there, come. Even for the people who are maybe their immune systems weren't what they should, maybe the older people more at risk.
Yeah.
The people more at risk is the term that has been used. The people more at risk, if they wanted to come, they should come, because I've heard a lot of those older people suffered much, much more at home than because of just the sheer loneliness of it than if they would have been at church. I say if they want to be at church and they know the risks, I say let them. And that sounds harsh, and that sounds, Noah, how dare you put these people's lives on the line? But you have to think of the spiritual lives so much more than you do the physical, right? This life is just a fleeting moment. And it's going to matter so much more that, hey, they went to heaven, even if their physical life wasn't as long as it could have been. But and this is, again, a very harsh phrase, but they died doing what they loved.
Yeah.
Right? And that's just, and again, my opinion, because I'm in such a different spot than that, right? A young, healthy male child.
I wouldn't say healthy.
A young male child.
Male child.
Again, it's completely.
You could have just said man. Like, that would have been fine.
It's completely different, but again, that's my opinion. I know some people share that opinion. I know some people who have the opposite opinion, but that, I believe that was just my 2 cents, you could say, for the whole thing.
Can I?
Yeah,
can
go
I
ahead.
Can I leave
Absolutely.
this question with
Absolutely.
a thought. In the first century, Christians were not struggling with COVID-19, but they were struggling with something that put their physical lives in a much higher risk of getting injured than COVID. And not once did we find Paul or any of the apostles saying you should stay home. They said we're going to get together anyway. And I just think it's interesting. And I know I'm not in the place to judge that, but I just find it interesting that in the first century, when they had a situation that arose that put their lives in danger, and for them it was the government, not a disease, but I think their physical lives were just as much danger as if it were a disease. When they were put in that situation, the response was not, well, we got to protect the elderly. While they cared about the elderly, this was about something bigger. And that's what determined what they did, and what they did is they worshiped together.
Yeah, and if we come back to excuses, I mean, who had a better excuse than the Christians? I mean, hey, if you're meeting, you could be burned alive at any point
Among
in time.
many other things.
Yeah. And I just, we don't have any excuse not to be here.
I have 3 things, and hopefully I can remember them all. I feel them slipping as I begin.
Hurry up.
I shouldn't have listed how many I think I have. So the first one is, this podcast is a complete bouncy ball that just bounces off random topics. But I like it that way because I like covering as much as possible. And even if it's more of a shotgun blast than it is a sniper rifle, interpret that analogy as you will.
Or don't.
Or don't. You're gonna see a little E next to the podcast now for explicit. No, but we like covering a lot of things. Also, secondly, a lot of people used COVID and the live streaming option as an excuse not to come back to church, right? And that is never okay. If the doors are open, you should be If the doors are open and you are able, you should be there. Let me add that important clarification. And then point number 3. I believe it's something similar to what y'all said about the Romans hunting down the Christians who professed, like, what excuse do we have not to be at church, right? Like, if you get COVID, that there is a chance that it could become serious. If you were caught by Romans, there's a 100% chance you were going to die. And so we talk about excuses, right? And we talk about, do we have the right to make excuses? And, it's hard because COVID-19 wasn't in the Bible. God didn't say you should or shouldn't leave the doors open if a worldwide pandemic affects the area that you're living in, right? But, God does say that no matter what, you need to assemble and worship. Y'all laughing at someone? Nah. Y'all need to assemble and worship no matter what. right? And I think that's where we find ourselves, and that's where we found ourselves with COVID-19. But that's just kind of acts as a greater synopsis for excuses in general, and that leads us to question number 2. Christians, are we called to take responsibility no matter what? Right? No matter what's happening, do we, I guess imagine the most extreme scenario that you can, right? The, you know, the one that always gets thrown around the most, I think, and sorry, I've been rambling on for a hot minute here, it feels like, is, someone points a gun at you. Hey, are you a Christian? Do you have an excuse to tell the person that, no, I'm not?
No. I mean,
Landon, you're open your Bible here.
I'm gonna let Landon.
I'm
gonna let Landon flip through his passage, but I mean, I can't think of a reason why. I mean, Jesus says, "If you deny me before men, then I will deny you before my Father who's in heaven."
Go ahead, Landon.
Oh no!
Oh no, I was just
Okay.
gonna say.
Did I take his passage?
No, I
Okay,
got another.
Good.
He's got another one. He said he was thinking about that one, but he knew you were going to take it.
I mean, Revelation 2:10. Do not fear any of the things that you will suffer. The devil indeed is about to throw some of you in prison, that you may be tested, and you will have tribulation 10 days. Be thou faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life. I mean, he listed 2 or 3 things right here that you could go through. You could go through suffering of different kinds. You can be thrown in prison, and even what it was listed there is until death, which means there's a stipulation where that might get brought up. And you brought up the most extreme situation, which would be your life or your Christianity. And Jesus told us which one you better be answering that response with.
Yeah, and Jesus again says, take up your cross and follow me. Well, what is your cross but an instrument of death? Right? So you're supposed to take up your death and follow Jesus Christ wherever that life may lead you, even if it is to your death.
So yeah, someday you drop the cross and there your fate is decided. And you do not know the day and you do not know the hour. I think that when you try to preserve your own life by, well, God wouldn't want me to throw my life away. Well, God decides when your life ends and when it keeps going. So, obviously I'm not saying, throw yourself off a cliff because only God knows when you're going to die. But I am saying that I think the more people who seek to preserve their life oftentimes compromise, whatever they can in order to keep it. And that's the thing with excuses is it gives people a chance to compromise, right? An excuse in that situation would be, well, God wouldn't want me to kill myself. And by telling that guy I was a Christian, that's basically what I'm doing, right? Well, no, that's an excuse that you're giving so you can, so you don't have to own up to the truth. And what a horrible position for somebody to be in. And unfortunately, I believe that has really happened before. And it's hard for me to sit here and just, say like, you have to say that you're a Christian, right? But I do believe that is true. And I hope that if I was faced with that scenario, then I would do the same.
I think we actually got a really good example of this in Scripture. And we have Jesus sitting in the garden, and he's praying to his Father, knowing that Judas and that mob, if you will, is about to come and arrest him. And you have Peter among the other 2 that were sitting there a little distance off, not really knowing what was about to happen. And then you have Jesus get arrested by this crazy mob. And then you have Peter that takes out this sword, and he is ready to kill for Jesus, but he's not ready to die for him. Because he's willing to fight, but he's not willing to stand down. And so when he has to stand down, he runs. And so Jesus is taken to this illegal trial to Pilate, and he's sitting there, and Peter's watching afar off. Well, why is he doing that? Because he's scared. And someone comes up and asks him, hey, you followed Jesus, didn't you? Well, here comes, I'm not going to call it an excuse, but it's about as good as you can get to one. Well, I don't know who you're talking about.
Jesus.
Like, who is that?
Yeah.
And it happens again and again. And on the 3rd time, not only does he deny him, but he curses God. And you have these things. Peter, what were you doing? You were willing to kill for Jesus, but you weren't ready to die for him. And you have these excuses that he's making of, I don't know who that is. I don't know who that is. You need to stay away from me. I don't know who that is. And then, because we like to end the story there, that's not where it ends. You have Jesus in one of the Gospels look at Peter.
He looks at Peter.
And they have this eye-to-eye contact. And Peter is like, I messed up.
Yeah, and the rooster crows. And
rooster
Peter remembers
crows.
what Jesus told him.
I messed up. And then in John 21, you have a discussion where Peter is asked by Jesus 3 times. Ironic, I think not. do you love me? Feed my sheep. You weren't ready to die for me yet. And then he ends that discussion by telling him how he was going to
How
die.
he will die. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, yeah, and that's a great point. And Benjamin, you said something that made me think. You said, well, if someone, if someone points a gun at me, obviously that's a terrible thing. And people might say, Benjamin, you've never been in that situation. What gives you the authority to say, yeah, you should own your faith during that time? Something we have to remember when we discuss Scripture is, I didn't say that you should own your faith during that time.
That's true. Yeah.
You didn't say that you should own your faith during that time. Jesus said
It's not Benjamin telling you that
Yeah.
this is the right thing to do. This is
Jesus said
Scripture.
it's the right thing to do.
And we try to, when I'm giving an opinion, we try to say that like this is just my opinion. But when things are backed by Scripture, there is no changing it.
Yeah, and we ask, and that leads to a thought. Well, is God asking too much of me? And
Right. By not being able to give an excuse.
yeah, and that leads when that excuse is made, God, you're asking too much of me. The selfishness in that thought is profound, because we have passages like John 3:16. We have passages like Romans 5:6-8, where Christ died for us when we were still sinners. It says, for a good man, some people might die, a few people might die for a good man, but Christ died for us while we were enemies. So no one has asked more of anyone than God has asked of himself, that he has asked of Jesus Christ, who died for us. So God has every authority, all the authority, to ask us to give everything back to him, because it all originates from him.
Maybe the only excuse that ever could have been made was Jesus in the garden saying, God, I want to die, but Lord, they won't understand why I'm dying. Most of them won't appreciate why I'm dying. It'll, the pain and all of that. Maybe that's the only excuse that could have been made, but Jesus decided not to make it. I love the analogy, or not the analogy, but the saying that, Jesus won the battle in the garden, right? Jesus crucified himself in the garden. And after that, there was no doubt in his mind if he was going to go through with it. The battle, like every decision Jesus made, he made it in the garden, right? And that's, if Jesus didn't make an excuse with that kind of pressure on him, why should I?
Yeah, and that's something we have to do right now, is go ahead and decide right now, when this situation arises, I'm not going to make an excuse, because that's what we talked about at the beginning. That's what your brain starts doing, right? As like a hard moment arises, you start thinking, well, how can I get out of this one? What can I say? What can I do to still make me look good, to still keep my self-esteem? But also, hey, I really don't want to take responsibility for this. Decide right now that, hey, I'm not going to make this excuse, and I'm going to make this decision. If whatever decision it is, I'm going to make it right now, that I will never leave the Lord, and I will never deny him, forsake him. I will never do anything that will compromise my faith. Go ahead and make that decision like Jesus did in the garden. And after that, again, there was no doubt of what he was going to do.
Then would you add to that? I feel like you keep looking like you're going to say.
I had a thought, but I'm going to save it for later. So
okay,
let's go ahead.
Well, you want to get into it now, because I'm about to. Throughout the course of the Straight Fire podcast, we have not touched this topic with a 10-foot pole. But
flip over.
Landon just buckled his seatbelt for those of you who can't see. But noted too. Oh, 2 seatbelts. But we haven't touched the topic of abortion, and unfortunately, that's what when you're talking about excuses in today's climate, you have to talk about abortion. Right. And there's other things that I kind of want to briefly touch on: alcoholism, transgenderism, stuff like that. People who say like, well, I was made to feel that way, so I have no choice. Right. But for now, I see you're already calculating that. But for now, abortion, right? I see people, saying for women who have been, raped and abused, like, don't they get the chance to have an abortion? Shouldn't they, if they're the only people eligible, shouldn't they at least be able to get an abortion, right? And, it's such a hard topic to ask, because it's like COVID, because we're never going to find ourselves in that situation, hopefully nowhere near that situation.
Well, I think it's like COVID and the fact that it's so real, like, hey, this is something
we really did deal with it.
Yeah, it's something we've all dealt with, anything like that. It's all around us. So, that's why it can be hard to talk about. You know what I
keep going.
Oh, do you want me to tackle the abortion thing right now?
Landon, do you have
That's
anything to
taken.
say before Noah really gets into it over there?
I'm just gonna let Noah have it.
I'm
Yeah,
saying,
I'm gonna say,
me,
Noah-
me and Landon are about to tag team your argument. Just get ready.
It's not an argument. It's real. It's a truth.
Yeah, okay. But I wanted to start with the first of all abortion, and then we can branch out to rape and incest, all the excuse. And again, these are very, very challenging things, and I don't mean to make light of any of them.
I mean,
at
they're
all.
real issues. I mean,
Yeah, and they are, and I don't mean to make light of any of them. But let me start with abortion first. So murder, as one of the best definitions I've heard of murder, is the deliberate taking of human life. Innocent human life. Yes, the deliberate taking of innocent human life. And so, human life, the Bible specifically implies that a baby in the womb is a human life. If you look at Luke chapter 1, it says, and in Luke 1:41 it says, and when Elizabeth heard the greeting of Mary, the baby leaped in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. So there's the word baby. That baby is still in the womb. And then if you flip over to Luke 2, and I'm not going to go to the specific passage, Jesus is described as a baby, but he's out of the womb there. Well, the same word is used for the baby in the womb and the baby out of the womb. The Bible makes, and this is just one small passage. There are plenty of other arguments, and I would encourage anybody listening to go look at those. But the Bible makes it clear that God does not view a baby inside the womb or a baby outside of the womb at any time any differently. They're the same. He views them the exact same, no matter if they're in the womb or out of the womb. So when a person makes a decision to kill a human, an innocent human, and we know babies are innocent, that is murder. And someone makes the decision that they don't want the baby, regardless of the other circumstances, and a innocent human life is taken. That is murder. And then you go into this rape and incest. Well, if this is a human being with its own genetic code, it's not part of the woman's body. And again, it's tragic and it is awful that either rape or abuse or incest, anything like that has happened. It is awful, and I cannot even imagine. But it's not the baby's fault. The baby shouldn't have to pay the punishment for the sin of something that he wasn't involved in. And good can still come from that baby. And people, and again, we've talked about this, people might say, Noah, you know nothing about this. What gives you the authority? I don't have the authority to say that, but God does. And that's exactly what his word implies. That's exactly what it says. And as hard as it is, this is God's will. And we cannot just take innocent human life because of the burden that it puts on us. That's not our decision to make. God created human life, and only God has or can give the authority to take it, no matter what the circumstances are.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I know you've been studying this for a long time, for years, and it's just unfortunately it's the world we live in today that mandates us talk about this. But I believe Noah thoroughly hit that on the head. Lynn, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but I have another question because I was thinking about abortion. This led to other things that excuses on. Yeah, no, you can sit this next one out, bud. Me and Landon got it. Just catch your breath over there.
No, but because Landon thankfully tackled the COVID one. So
yeah, that's true. I'm gonna say. So Landon's turn now. Don't ask me to do it. I can get there. It's just a lot of loops and back.
We'll forget what the question was.
Yeah. I'll just think of more questions that I'm going to start asking while but anyway. Speaking of alcoholism, I hear a lot of people say it's genetic. I have no it's just the way I was born, right? Is there what's the word? Is there validity? There it is. Is there validity to that, or do people have an excuse there, or?
Well, it depends on what they mean when they say I was born like this. If you're saying I was born with the desire to get drunk and to drink alcohol, well, no. What you were born with was desire. And sometimes that desire as a human leads you to want to do sinful things. We're all born with those desires. And so if you're trying to make the excuse of I can drink alcohol because I have a desire to do that, Well, that's not an. I mean, if that's the case, then anyone that has a desire to do anything, we could do it because that's how I was born. It's not how you were born. It's because you're human, and humans have that. I want to say, well, flaw, if you will.
Yeah.
The flesh is weak, as Jesus would say.
Yeah, Bidron is specifically saying, okay, because alcoholism is genetic.
Yeah.
So the like the kid might be more inclined to want that or have problems with it.
Yeah.
So
would that kid have an excuse?
would that kid be able to say this problem?
It's the way I am.
It's the way I was made. Stuff like that. Would he be able to say that?
Well, no. I mean, you look at Scripture, and Jesus is very clear on alcohol, and people try to make the excuse. I don't know what this kid is it just drinking, like social drinking or getting drunk, and that would of course be thrown in there.
everything.
And I'm just gonna go with that. I don't care which one it is. People say, as long as you don't get drunk, but the Scripture is very clear when it says to not be drunk with wine. When you look at that word, what it means is a process, and a process begins at the start. So when I start drinking, I am drunk. I am more drunk than I was before I started drinking. And the Bible is clear that you shouldn't be drunk with wine, implying that you should never drink it at all. And if it says you shouldn't do that, then I don't care. There really is no excuse as to why you could do that.
Actually, there is one.
Here
For
we go.
medicinal purposes. Because Paul
yeah.
says, take a little wine for your stomach's sake.
Yeah.
Well, I would argue, first off, you don't know that that's fermented. I mean, number one, that could be grape juice, and you don't know that that's fermented. But
That's true. Yeah,
and I mean, there are some, I don't want to say gray areas to that, but there are some things that you could discuss whether or not that's okay. But I mean, that's not what that kid.
I mean, me and Noah, yeah, exactly. Me and Noah were talking the other day. Like we'll watch old westerns, right? Where the old bandit's got a bullet in his leg and they got to get it out. And he's taking a pop off a whiskey bottle, take the edge off before they take it out.
Right.
Like, is that okay? Like, if you got shot and you needed some painkiller, like, would that be okay?
Yeah. I mean that's a completely different discussion. But
And I mean, then you could argue, like,
Could you give me a quick?
is medicine okay?
Could you give me a quick answer on if that would be okay or not? Yes or no? No.
Yes.
Okay. Nice. Moving on to
Because alcohol technically is medicine, sort of. I really don't want to get into complex. Don't make me get into the weeds bad. But
I would say you're an EMT student.
it does. I mean, it's a painkiller.
Yeah.
I mean, that's medicinal. Are we gonna say you can't have any painkiller?
No, that's true.
And again,
that's a good point.
The ethics of medicine is a long discussed topic.
Yeah,
But
that's true.
you cannot use that as an excuse to say, well, alcohol is a painkiller. I'm in pain, minor pain, not major, and I want to get drunk.
Well, yeah, and in today's world that we live in, like I'm talking about a world where the literal only painkiller they have is
exactly.
whiskey. Like in today's world, you have actual painkillers that you can give out. But anyway, moving on from that, even though it's a fun discussion. What you flipping that notebook, do you know?
I'm flipping it back over.
Transgenderism, because this one has come about, well, not recently. It's come to the spotlight more recently. A lot of people say like they can't help it. So I can't go, it's just the way that I've always been, right? It's just the way that I feel. How am I supposed to like control the way I feel? Like,
Are we defining this as the excuse of
I
this
would
is how
say-
it was made?
yeah, like for instance, if a male wants to become female, he just says, I simply feel that I'm female. Like I can't help the way that I feel. If a female is attracted to another female, I simply feel this way, and I can't help the way that I feel. Like y'all see where I'm going with this.
Landon already hit on it. We all have desires, right? I mean, I've never had anything like that desire, but I mean, I can't speak to if they're real or not, or if they're imagined, anything like that. I'm not going to get into that. But we all have desires, we all pick any desire. I have the desire to eat food.
I'm gonna say, well, I have the desire to lay around and eat, Cheetos all day.
Yeah,
but
I have.
That
Well,
doesn't,
I have the
that
desire.
doesn't make it good.
I have the desire to not go to work.
I don't know. I'm sorry. Maybe that's making light of this situation that people are in. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
But,
Okay.
like,
Then
The desire to sin, right? We all struggle with different temptations.
Well, I mean, get real with it. I have the desire to look at things I shouldn't be looking at. Well, does that mean just because I want to do it that I should do it?
Yeah.
Well, absolutely not. God says, hey, you're going to have to deny yourself, whatever your desires may be. You still have to. God never says, you feel this way, that means give into it. We still have these, even though everything God created was good, it's still a fallen, it fell. It's a fallen creation now. And we have sinful desires, and perversions of what God made. But God, that's why Jesus says and stresses so much, if you're going to follow me, you have to deny yourself. And so this thought of, well, it's how I was made. Well, Jesus never gives that any validity. God never gives that any validity. The Bible doesn't ever say anything about that. The Bible is actually always saying you need to be better, right?
Yeah.
You don't need to fall back to what you feel. You need to fall back to what you need to look forward to what you know in the Bible.
Yeah, you used this example earlier, and I'm sorry, Landon. I've gone on for a hot minute. Men have a desire for pornography. Like that's a desire that men have. I don't really want to get into all that because that's a whole nother can of worms. But if a man says, well, it's just the way that I'm made to feel, God literally made me to feel this way. So is it okay for me to look at this stuff? Well, of course not. Like you can't, in taking the desires that God gives you and perverting them and saying, well, God gave me this and now, I'm stuck drinking alcohol, I'm stuck doing whatever, then, I'm okay. It's okay if I do this. Well, it never is. You have to find the strength within yourself to say no. I listened to a great lesson last night about the strength of finding no. And he talked about in Ezra, I believe it was Ezra 10, 1-4. I'm not going to read it right now. If you want to, you can. It's a great passage. But just the problem is with excuses is the problem with excuses is there it is that people are finding some other ways that they don't have to say no. It's the avoidance of denying self. I think that's what excuse is at its core. Landon, would you agree? Out of all me and Noah have said, what would you like to? What would you like to?
Amen. No, I think kind of circling back to that. Anything you would argue, this is the way I was born. When God made you, you were perfect. And what you're arguing for is you were born with the desire to do something that is sinful. When God made you, you were perfect. As a child, you are perfect, and you grow up and you start doing things you shouldn't, and you start having certain weaknesses that are unique to you. And that's how Satan gets people, because we're all unique in what we're tempted with. And it's not that I was born with this. It's just that as I've grown up, there are certain things that I'm going to be weaker to than you are. There are things that I'm going to be tempted with that you guys aren't going to be. And that's just human nature.
Right. We're kind of start wrapping this up. We're going to kind of start wrapping this up. Benjamin's goal for 2025: pronunciate things a little better.
Good luck with that.
A little better, a little better. But that no one wants to hear me say, "Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Straight Fire Podcast, where we are going to be pronouncing things a little better." I can't do it. But yeah, as we kind of start wrapping up, the last question I had, and we can touch on it briefly, was: do the hardest problems deserve the most grace? Do people who have had to make extremely hard choices, right, who have what the world would call the best excuses, don't they deserve the most grace from us? Hey, that was the wrong decision that was the wrong decision for you to make, but I understand how hard it was.
Can I ask a clarifying question before Landon?
A clarifying question?
A clarifying question before Landon.
I think y'all
crushes
should
you?
adopt my goal of.
Are you saying more grace from us or more grace from God?
I would say more grace from us, because God's grace is
just us more
unlimited. We cannot.
understanding.
Yes, there it is.
There.
We cannot have as much grace as God has. It is physically impossible and spiritually impossible. It is impossible in every sense of the word.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, that's good, because I was gonna ask too, just to make sure I understood where we were going with this, and it's just kind of the idea that there are some people that go through things, that have things that happen that we would consider more severe, more drastic than others. People that
Jurassic.
yeah.
I'm sorry. I can't stop hearing stuff now. Okay, continue on.
Just shut up. But there are things that happen in some people's lives that we would consider bigger, if you will.
Oh yeah, of course.
And you do wonder, do people deserve more grace and more understanding than others? And I would say understanding, yes. There are some people that are going to require me to have a more I'm not gonna say lenient because we shouldn't be. When it comes to the truth,
Yeah.
we stand with the truth.
We're not lenient, but
understanding.
understanding.
I'm not
yeah.
telling you that what you did is okay. And I'm not going to let you make excuses because I care about you enough to not let you do that. But there are times when you're going to do something and it's wrong. And I'm going to help you see that it's wrong. But I'm also going to understand where you're coming from. And that's going to change how I go about helping you get through that and seeing that your excuses are inadequate. And I would hope people would do the same for me.
Yeah. You know, man, I've talked a lot on this podcast. You know, I typically try to avoid it, but I guess I guess we're all talking a little more, except Landon. Landon's talking about the same. But anyway,
That's all I need.
yeah. I guess you know, I just think that nobody likes people who give a lot of excuses, right? They're not fun people to be around. They're not fun people to work with. But, you know, leniency is also required, right? Paul says, bear with your weaker brothers. And this has to be an example. This has to be an example of that, right? By first showing them that what they're doing is wrong, but also by understanding, right, that we all struggle. So there's a fine line to walk when dealing with excuses, but there's also a fine line to walk while living the Christian life. Noah, would you add anything before we close?
Yeah, one quick thing, really quick, that I wrote down. It's this idea of allowing situations to control your actions. This idea of just the fact that, hey, you know, we all know these people who, whatever situation arises, they're going to find a way to get out of their responsibilities, or if they make a mistake, they're going to find a way to make sure it's not their mistake. When you allow situations to rule the choices you make, you are allowing worldly things around you to affect your spiritual choices, right? And we all know that this world is ruled by the devil. It is ruled, he controls this world. So when we allow the world to dictate our choices, well, we're not going to get any closer to God. In fact, we're going to get farther from God. But if we allow the Bible to dictate our choices here on this earth, if we allow the spiritual to dictate our spiritual path, because it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense for the worldly to dictate our spiritual path, right? But if we allow that Bible, if we allow the spiritual to dictate our spiritual path, then ultimately we'll find ourselves in heaven with God one day.
Amen. And yeah, Glenn, go ahead. Yes, go ahead. Absolutely. You know, we should have been over 2 minutes ago, but that's no, I'm kidding.
I say
go
what?
for it.
We don't have a time.
This might be the longest podcast ever, actually.
We'll-
25, or we're just gonna get even longer.
We'll go for 2 hours. The next one. No, I'm just
Oh, can you
Um,
imagine?
kidding. Ooh, I would not listen to us for 2 hours. Anyway, this
I think people barely listen to us for 45 minutes. Like, I gotta be honest.
besides our parents, it's probably like. But no, this was the thought that I had. Like whenever it was that I said I had a thought that I was going to save to the end of the podcast. The best excuse that any of us could ever give is that God doesn't understand. If I could look at Jesus and say, you don't understand what this is like, that would be an excuse that would carry weight. Is if I could look at God and say, this is hard and you don't understand what this is like. But that was taken away from us. The only excuse that we could ever make that would carry any weight, Jesus took away because he said, I'm going to see what that's like. So I can understand what that's like when you're struggling, when you want to make those excuses. I can relate and I can understand.
Right. Ladies and gentlemen, that will end the podcast here. I don't have anything to add to that. We hope that you will. We hope that you've enjoyed this episode. Excuse me. Hope that you've enjoyed this episode and that you'll give it, a like on YouTube, 5 stars on all the other podcast apps, and share it to everyone you can. Hopefully they won't think that you're. No, I lost it. Hopefully that won't make them think that you're calling them. What's a person who makes excuses? What would you call someone who makes a lot of excuses?
An excuser.
Yeah, hopefully they won't think you're calling them an excuser, I guess. But either way, we just yeah, for real. It's just so great to have all of you listening. No matter how many views or likes our podcast gets, we just enjoy making them so much, and we hope that they benefit you and anyone else you share them to. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you guys in the next one. Once again, thanks.